Nancy, I don't know to what extent Americans are paying attention to this most recent wrinkle here when it comes to whether it's presidential immunity in Donald Trump's case, executive privilege, as Joe Biden is invoking. Are these themes that matter to voters?
I don't think that they matter a ton. I mean, I think the idea of executive privilege is not something that's going to resonate with a huge number of voters, particularly now, 6 months before the election. Mm-hmm. We have seen what's been happening in New York with Trump's hush money trial also sort of not resonating as much as the Biden campaign would want. And I think that what voters remain focused on is foreign policy, Israel, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening with the economy. Mm-hmm. These are really the issues, and sort of all of the trials, executive privilege, sort of these ongoing cases, I think most people just can't follow day to day.
Well, perhaps they could follow more easily if they had access to the actual audio tapes that would likely be clipped and circulated over and over again, and potentially campaign ads. We didn't just hear from Mike Johnson, who expressed disappointment with this decision from President Biden, but also from Senator Lindsey Graham, who had this to say to Bloomberg earlier today.
I'd like to have what he set out because the report's pretty damning, and I think the American people need to hear it for themselves. Put the shoe on the other foot. If you had a report, suggesting that President Trump wasn't with it, everybody would be, every media outlet in the country would be yelling to release the tapes. Release the tapes.
The senator there speaking with a number of reporters on Capitol Hill earlier today. And when he's talking about what he says is a pretty damning report, it's worth bearing in mind that what Robert Hur said in this, in part, was that he wasn't pressing charges, or he didn't recommend it because he thought a jury might view President Biden the same way he did, as a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. We were all buzzing about it for weeks after it was released. If you don't allow the tape of the conversation out, does it suggest that you actually might have something to hide about your mental acuity?
Yeah, so the transcript of this is mostly out. It's been slightly redacted. Congress has access to what the president said, but there is this intangible component to it, right? Because of how Hur characterized it in his report as sympathetic, well-meaning man with a poor, elderly man with a poor memory. That's a subjective judgment of how he presented himself that you can really only get from that tape. And the reason why the White House does not want this tape released is the very reason why Republicans in Congress do want it released, is because exactly that. This is more political than substantive in terms of trying to figure out. Remember, this all started with, did President Biden, then Vice President, illegally keep classified information at his home? We're long past that now. This is now about President Biden's age and his mental acuity.
Mm-hmm. You guys both specialize in covering politics and communication. You heard Jim Jordan's point on this. The transcript is not the same, Nancy. He invokes inflection and emphasis. The changes in voice are what lawmakers want to hear. Is that a fair request?
I mean, I think that the Trump campaign and the Trump allies like Jim Jordan really believe that, Biden is too old to be president, even though Trump is almost the same age. But they really sort of are trying to make his mental acuity a main point of the campaign. He stutters sometimes, he makes verbal gaffes. I think that they want to use this tape to really highlight that. And they will splice it, as Kailey said, and put it in a bunch of ads. And the Biden people, they don't want this to be an issue. And so they're really trying to clamp down on it. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you have the age issue that we know dogs this president. There's a number of others as well, including the economy, many others, including the war in Israel. And as a result, he's losing support in a number of key demographic groups, including black voters. But it does seem that he's paying attention to that issue in particular this week, as he has a series of events, including today, meeting with the families of the plaintiffs in the landmark Brown versus Board of Education case. And we heard from the White House press secretary, that is, Karine Jean-Pierre, earlier today.
The president was proud to participate in this meeting and honor the legacy of those who paved the way for progress and hard-fought rights for Black Americans, while highlighting his vision for how we must continue to build on these freedoms.
So, Gregory, there was this meeting today. He will be at the African American History Museum as well this week. He'll go down to Atlanta to give the commencement address at Morehouse College this weekend. We can tell pretty clearly what this effort is aimed at. But is it going to go far enough when consistently polls are showing that increasingly black voters are turning toward Donald Trump?
I don't know how much they're turning towards Donald Trump. That remains to be seen. That they certainly are turning away from Joe Biden. Joe Biden should be clearly in the 80s to 90s among black voters. He's only in the 60s. Many of those voters are not saying they're going to vote for Trump. They're saying, I'm undecided. They're staying on the sidelines. They want President Biden to earn his vote. There is a little bit of an uptick in terms of how many say that they're going to vote for Republican. I think that might be generational. Those might be the ones that President Trump is targeting. But President Trump is making the case and really sort of encouraging black voters to think about what have Democrats done for you lately. Black Democrats are especially economic voters. They're worried about inflation. They're especially worried about the cost of housing. And so they want to hold Joe Biden's feet to the fire to deliver on those issues.
I'll tell you, Jim Clyburn takes a different view on this. It's pretty interesting. He's about to hit the road with Joe Biden. And, of course, we all know that he had a lot to do with Joe Biden winning the election the first time around. We spoke yesterday with Dr. Bernice King, who made it clear that consistency was a problem beyond promises unkept or policy even, the consistency of being present. Jim Clyburn tells Punchbowl, I don't know what this polling is all about. Quote, Joe Biden does not have a problem with black voters. Whatever you hear to the contrary, that's just not true. How important of a role will Jim Clyburn play in this election, again, possibly for Joe Biden?
I think he'll play a huge role, but also I think that, a bunch of, surrogates who are black politicians will play a really key role. I mean, Biden really needs to hold on to that black vote. That is a really key part of his coalition, heading into the 2024 election. And we have seen a lot of polling showing Trump really is making inroads, particularly with black men who, as Gregory said, are disappointed by pocketbook issues and also some of the foreign policy crises that Biden has faced. And even if, Trump really just needs to shave off like a few percentage points, and that could really make a difference in black support in swing states with the election.